There comes a point in these relationships when you notice something that should have been obvious much earlier, but somehow never was. It happens in a small moment. Maybe you stop explaining. Maybe you let the phone ring. Maybe they throw out the same accusation, the same bait, the same little blade disguised as conversation, and for the first time, your body does not rush to defend itself. And in that silence, something shifts. Not just in you, in them. Because that is the part most people do not understand at first. A narcissistic person is not only trying to win an argument or protect an image. They are trying to prove that they can still enter your mind, disturb your peace, and make your emotional world revolve around them. That is the deeper reward. Not truth, not repair, control. And once you see that, the whole game starts to look different. A lot of people imagine power looks loud. They imagine it looks like the perfect comeback, the final confrontation, the speech that finally leaves the other person speechless. But with narcissistic patterns, that fantasy usually keeps you trapped, because your need to be understood is exactly what keeps you emotionally available to someone who has already shown you that understanding was never the point. The point was access. Access to your attention. Access to your confusion. Access to your nervous system. That is why the first real crack in their control often begins with something deceptively simple. You stop giving them immediate emotional entry, not because you are playing games, and not because you have become cold, but because you finally understand that every frantic defense, every tearful explanation, every attempt to make them be fair has been functioning like an open invitation. You were showing them exactly where to touch the wound. Silence, in that context, is not weakness. It is the closing of the gate. And silence does not always mean disappearing completely. Sometimes it means not answering a loaded text the second it arrives. Sometimes it means hearing the distortion and refusing to stand trial inside a conversation designed to make you lose. Sometimes it means understanding that not every lie deserves your correction, because some people do not twist reality by accident. They twist it to keep you busy. That is what makes silence so destabilizing to them. They can handle anger. In a strange way, they even enjoy it, because anger still proves they matter. It proves they can still move you. But when you become harder to provoke, when your energy stops rushing toward them on command, they are forced to confront something they hate more than criticism: irrelevance. And once that begins, boundaries have to change too. Not soft boundaries, not the kind wrapped in excessive explanation, where you practically beg to be respected. Narcissistic people often hear explanations as openings. They hear your kindness as flexibility. They hear your pain as negotiable. So the boundary that changes everything is usually the one that becomes clear enough to be felt. Not, "I'd really appreciate it if you stopped." More like, "If this continues, I'm ending the conversation." Then you end it. That follow-through matters more than people realize, because the narcissistic mind is always testing for weakness in the structure, not necessarily because they are consciously plotting every second, but because control has become their language. They press on the door to see if it still opens. They provoke to see if you still break pattern. They cross the line to see whether the line was ever real. And every time the consequence arrives, without drama, without begging, without a courtroom speech, the message lands deeper than words ever could. You are no longer available in the old way. That is also why emotional flatness becomes so powerful. Not numbness, not suppression, just a refusal to perform pain for someone who feeds on reaction. Inside, you may still feel the sting. Your heart may still race. Your mind may still go spinning after a cruel remark, or a sudden reversal, or a familiar piece of gaslighting, but on the outside, you stop offering the visible collapse they have come to expect. You answer briefly, or not at all. You do not rise to the hook. You do not become the scene. That is often when they escalate. People are surprised by this, but they should not be. When a method has worked for years, the first response to its failure is usually more of the same. More guilt, more charm, more rage, more confusion, more rewriting, more little tests to see whether the old version of you is still in there somewhere, waiting to come running back into the script. And this is where many people get pulled in again, because escalation can feel like proof that the boundary is wrong. It is usually proof that the boundary is real. What unnerves them is not your cruelty. It is your steadiness. And then comes the part almost no one talks about honestly enough. Attention itself is a form of emotional currency, not just love, not just praise, attention. Monitoring them, checking their page, replaying their words, taking the bait, responding to the fake emergency. Even hatred can become a form of continued investment if it keeps them sitting at the center of your mind. That is why real detachment feels so threatening to them. You are not only withdrawing your affection, you are withdrawing your audience. For someone built around image, that lands like disappearance. And the hardest version of this is not outward. It is inward. It is when you stop organizing your private life around their moods, their timing, their chaos, their sudden needs, their punishments, their disappearances, their returns. It is when your day starts to belong to you again. Your thoughts start to belong to you again. Your body stops waiting for impact. That quiet rearrangement is often what they sense before anyone else does. And it unsettles them because it means the old access point is closing for good. Or then there is truth. Not the dramatic kind. Not the exposing, theatrical kind people fantasize about when they are exhausted and furious. I mean the calm truth that clears the fog in your own mind. The truth that says, that did happen. The truth that says, you are shifting blame again. The truth that says, I am not discussing this in circles. The truth that does not ask permission to exist. When you begin speaking from that place, even if only to yourself at first, the psychological weather changes. Because narcissistic dynamics survive on distortion, on making you question sequence, motive, proportion, memory, impact, meaning, but once your own reality becomes more solid to you than their version of events, something inside the pattern starts dying. You stop begging them to confirm what you already know. You stop handing them authority over your perception. And that is devastating to a person who relied on your self-doubt as part of their control. Still, the deepest break is not in what you say to them. It is in what you begin building without them. Not a performance, not a revenge body, not a curated public glow-up designed to make them regret losing you. That still leaves them too close to the center. The real shift is far less visible and much more powerful. You sleep more deeply. You laugh without checking who will punish you for it. You make plans that do not include their unpredictability. You reconnect with parts of yourself that had to go quiet just to survive the relationship. You become more whole in private, which means their absence stops feeling like a wound and starts feeling like oxygen. That may be the hardest thing for them to tolerate. Because people with narcissistic patterns often need to believe that once they leave confusion behind, confusion remains. They want their influence to outlast their presence. They want to imagine that you still orbit what they think, what they feel, whether they approve, whether they return. But a life that becomes full without them destroys that fantasy. It tells the truth without saying a word. You were never powered by them. You were drained by them. And eventually, that brings you to the final shift. which is also the quietest one. You stop trying to win. You stop trying to make them admit it. Stop trying to make them understand what they did. Stop trying to extract remorse from a structure built to avoid it. Stop trying to get the perfect ending from someone who fed on keeping things unresolved. And that is when the hold weakens for real, because the game depended on your participation much more than you were ever allowed to see. The truth is, what affects a narcissistic person most is not your revenge. It is your refusal to remain emotionally reachable in the old way. It is your calm, your boundaries, your lack of urgency, your unwillingness to keep auditioning for basic decency, your clarity, your private healing, your decision to let your life become yours again. That is the part they cannot stand. Not because you destroyed them, because you became unreachable to the version of them that only knew how to feel powerful by entering your peace and disturbing it. And once that access is gone, all they are left with is themselves.